I'm in the business of wanting to resurrect that triumphant beast in you.
Welcome to The Boundless Body, the podcast with a somatic doctor interviewing innovative thinkers about their perspectives relating to the arts and sciences of therapy. Discover The Boundless Body.
Back to the mystery.
Okay, happy Halloween, Boundless Body listeners. I have Annalise Oatman with me today. Welcome, Annalise. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Are you okay if we get witchy today?
Always. I can't get enough. Can't get enough of the witchy stuff.
Let's get witchy somatic. Somatically witchy, witchy somatically. How about that?
Okay. That's the best kind. That's the most powerful kind.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to read your bio because that's, just kind of like the rhythm here. So I'm going to read that first and then we'll jump into the cauldron. Or the cauldron will jump into us, or there will be cauldroning.
There's going to be bubbling, boiling, trouble, toiling. I don't know. Whatever's in a cauldron.
Yes. All right, so here we go. Annalise Oatman is dedicated to being radically present and open-hearted in every offering, recording, group, or one-on-one session. Her experiential learning journey includes studying with Shipibo medicine men and women and other shamanic lineage keepers, as well as with senior Jungian analyst, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and feminist theologian Megan Watterson. Annalise holds a master's in philosophy from Trinity College Dublin, a master's in social work, and has 10 years of experience in mental health. This includes working in residential programs and community-based mental health programs for traumatized children and youth. She's also an EMDR trauma resolution therapist, a nutrition coach, a hypnotherapist, and an energy medicine practitioner. Interdisciplinary, I love it. Okay, so in 2021, she published her first full-length book, Heal Your Witch Wound, which became a #1 bestseller on Amazon. So excited to have you here today, Annalise.
Oh, thank you so much. Should I call you Brian or Dr. B? I realized I should have asked you earlier.
Whatevs, doesn't matter. Yeah, whatever's. Yeah, Dr. B is, students that like me, students that don't like me, I don't know, they call me Dr. Tierney or something. I don't know.
Cool. Oh, it's always interesting to hear your bio read to you. It's like, who is that person? Is that me?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm coming up on 12 years in the mental health field now. I just realized in 2025 it will be 12 years, but maybe it's been my entire life. Maybe just being a human is being in the mental health field.
I've been in the pattern of asking healers, asking helpers what their initiatory illness was, because a lot of folks drawn to the healing arts and sciences and so on have gone through some suffering themselves. Mm-hmm. And I like to frame it kind of as an initiatory event, that our illnesses and our suffering initiates us into the craft. Yes. Do you vibe with that? Do you have a narrative for us about that, about your healing journey and, some challenges, personal challenges you encountered along the way?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you.
Eugene?
Where should I begin? I mean, the journey that stands out the most is the more recent one where I was in a 4-year relationship and got engaged and was living with my partner up in Sonoma County, California. We ended up breaking up. We realized we didn't want the same things in life after all. And this was at a time when most people in my life and family, it seemed, were getting married and having babies. And that was something that had always been really important to me. And I realized with the Black Madonna behind me, this archetype of the mother has always been a really key theme in my life and in my pain and the path of awakening that I'm on, as I think we're all on a path of awakening of some kind or other. I'm definitely not there, but I think we have moments of awakening, but then we circle around through our stuff again and keep seeing things from a different perspective. But to get back to the initiatory illness, that breakup was not a normal breakup for me. It was the obliteration of everything that I thought my life was supposed to be and who I thought I was supposed to be in my family, to be a good daughter. And to be a good daughter to the patriarchy, to the culture in a way. I think women often don't say this, but feel they have to have accomplished the life partnership and becoming a physical, biological mother by a certain age, or else maybe there's something wrong with me, or, people talk about it in this kind of derogatory way, like they're going into desperation mode. I've heard that and things. Like that being said. And so that experience it felt like I'd been separated from what I thought was my destiny or my fate. Interestingly, this morning I learned that the word disaster actually means separation from your stars. I like to interpret it now at the end of this journey as separation from the North Star, the guiding star, the soul. And I think a lot of times when we're sent into the underworld or we're sent on a hell journey of some kind, that's the light that we're meant to cultivate down there in the deepest darkness of the underworld. That sent me on a healing journey that took me to Peru so I could actually hear my voice again. I felt so lost. My private practice had become fully remote because of COVID. So I had the freedom to go live anywhere in the world, but I had no real reason to be anywhere, which sounds fabulous on the face of it. And it was, and I'm so grateful for my work. I love it. But it felt like an utter bewilderment, a dark night of the soul, and all my deepest stuff was coming up. And I ended up doing deep somatic healing work and women's groups and Jungian analysis and my own ketamine journeys. And finally, I could tie this all together with the image of Inanna's journey into the underworld, if you like.
Oh, yeah, I like.
If you're not familiar with that myth, the ancient Sumerian goddess Inanna is called into the underworld. I think she has to go meet her sister Ereshkigal or something. And as she goes through each gate, each layer deeper into the underworld, something is removed from her. First, it's her crown and her jewels. And another layer is removed and another layer is removed until she's standing completely naked at the bottom of the underworld. And I think that's the removal of one layer of conditioning, one trauma imprint, indoctrination from the family or the culture. And you just go through like layer after mask, after shame cloak, after whatever you want to call it, story about who you are until you meet the light, the Ananda, the unbounded bliss at the center of the body, one way or another.
The Boundless Body podcast is brought to you by BiTap, the creators of a powerful bilateral stimulation tool for nervous system regulation. I use this tapping technology clinically because it's a wonderful, gentle, pulsatile, tactile stimulation that helps the brain to regulate experience. And what I mean by regulate experience is not just managing the bad stuff, but amplifying the good stuff. So these tappers aren't just used clinically, they're used in many different settings, including with frontline workers, people that have test anxiety, kids and parents, teachers and school counselors, people in addiction recovery, restless sleepers, and people that are struggling with pain management and medical issues. So the benefits are vast, You can go to the BiTap website to get your tappers to help with your nervous system. And you can enter the Brian 10 code to get your discount. I hope you enjoy the show.
Anyway, I realized that was a really long-winded answer to your
Well,
question.
yeah.
But that's how I see it now. That's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah. I mean, I think the initiatory illness is, it puts one in touch with the calling, the
Yes.
calling into the craft. Deep down there in the darkness, in the guts of the earth, when things have been stripped, like you've said, in the underworld, and we're in the acid bath of transformation, then, this sweet call can start to cohere, and just be like, okay, all right, we got a mission for you.
Yeah.
We got a mission for you. And so sounds like it was kind of in the Andes that call started to cohere for you, or there's a significant element of that, or at least with Andes shamanism vibes?
Yeah. My introduction to Peruvian shamanism was through the shamanic energy medicine lineage of the Q'ero people of the Andes. And coincidentally, the year that I was studying and being initiated into that lineage, I also ended up traveling to the jungle, the rainforest, more in northern Peru, to work with Shipibo medicine people and to experience 6 ayahuasca plant medicine ceremonies with them. I actually only drank ayahuasca in 4 of those ceremonies, but that journey did give me the initial clues and catalyzed the process. I would say, my kind of rational ego personality went into that thinking, great, I'm going to do these ceremonies and then all the problems in my life are going to be solved. And I'm going to know who my partner is, and I'm going to know where I'm supposed to live, and I'll just move on with my life. But it didn't quite work that way. It catalyzed a deeper, longer process that I would have to see through on its own time.
Mm-hmm. And so at that time, you had already done your philosophy education, yeah? Or
Yeah, that was a while back.
That was a while back.
Yeah, I graduated in 2010 from Trinity College in Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
That was another life.
As a kind of Jungian informed therapist, I'm feeling that you still have a kind of lively relationship with various philosophical traditions, Jung included. You've already mentioned, kind of on the sly, Sylvia Brenton Pereira, who's a just incredible Jungian philosopher. She's the one who wrote Descent to the Goddess, which is
okay.
this wonderful piece about Inanna. It's just and then she also wrote The Scapegoat Complex, which is an extraordinary book. Talking about human scapegoating. Have you noticed in your practice or in your life any tendencies in humanity to scapegoat?
Oh my God, yeah. Because it's so much easier. It's so much easier to throw your shadow and the parts of yourself that you reject and don't want to own onto other people. And reject it in them.
Yeah, Pereira just nails it. And she names it as an archetype. Meaning this is ubiquitous. This is what humans do. This is what families do. This is what cultures do. This is what individuals do.
Yeah.
Try to jettison the darkness inside and project it onto another.
Yep.
So that one can maintain one's innocence and purity.
Exactly. Because I think that's what buttresses the ego, is its ideas of its own goodness and rightness. Paradoxically.
Yes. Yeah. I talk a whole lot in my book, which I've just literally articulated the last lines of this week. I've been working on it for 4.5 years. So it's been quite a journey for me, but I talk a lot about toxic innocence.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Claims to purity while one is doing all sorts of scapegoating and othering to maintain that purity and so on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And that can take, I've seen that in so many forms.
Yeah. You, at this phase, when you were with the Shipibo and stuff like that, you had already done social work training?
Yes. Yeah. Had gone through grad school and done all my internships and all of that, and had already started my private practice and was licensed and had been licensed and in private practice for a few years, 3
And you're
years.
working with in community mental health and with kids. Was that out here in California?
Yes. So
Yeah.
that's where I got my start in the mental health world, was working in community-based mental health. And actually my very first job before grad school was in a group home for foster youth who were all, had trauma, unfortunately. And that experience extended into my postgraduate internship working in community-based mental health with kids, families, youth in the foster care system. And so saw a lot of trauma, a lot of attachment, relational trauma.
Mm.
Yeah. And then I started working with adults, mostly women, in my private practice. But I work with all genders, all people. I love being open to all genders and focusing on the feminine path, but not making it only about and for women.
Yeah, I like that. I like
Mm.
that a lot. So that was you did some of this community mental health stuff in Sonoma, or this was later?
So the very first job I had in a group home was in Sonoma. And then I was working in San Francisco Connections. It's a branch of Seneca. Maybe you've heard of Seneca. It's a pretty extensive organization in California for foster youth. So that's where I got my licensure hours.
And you published a book about healing the witch wound. Can we talk about the witch wound, and like maybe you could segue from that? Like, how did you get passionate about working with women and witchy ways, and like how did that cauldron start to really bubble for you?
Yeah. Speaking from right where I am on my journey now, I feel like I'm giving myself more permission to love the things I love and care about the things I care about, because I don't even think it's voluntary. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
if you really tune into, why am I passionate about this? I don't remember choosing to be passionate about it. It just
Yeah.
is. I'm actually taking a class with Matt Carden right now, he's writing a book right now called Writing at the Wellspring. And I think his work is really interesting on the concept of the daimon,
Mm.
which is really, you could think of it as the unconscious, and
Mm.
writing and creating from a place of relationship to, I guess if we want to call it the unconscious, as almost another entity or an attendant spirit that comes into this life with us.
Mm.
So the concept of daimon is also connected to the concept of a genius. And that concept over time has been watered down and narrowed into a quality that we say only certain very extraordinary individuals have. But if you trace this concept back to its roots, it's the idea of an attendant spirit that we all come into the world with. I think my daimon loves these things. Let me see if I can kind of dial in an answer to that will be accessible for people. Why did I start working with women? Why do I love this? Why am I passionate about it? I had some really profound experiences reading the work of Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes and working with her in person, and also the work of another great Jungian analyst, Marianne Woodman. And a lot of their work is focused on women. And I was so drawn to this idea that there's something about the feminine psyche and the feminine soul that needs to be understood in its own way. And even the writer Anais Nin talks about this in her own way, kind of trying to construct a women's psychology out of our own native understanding of what it is to inhabit this kind of female body soul.
The way that I'm thinking about the Daimon is that
Mhm.
it's a figure of the thresholds. It's a magical figure.
Yeah.
The magician archetype or the magus, the witch, they inhabit the borderlands. They're the threshold figures. And I'm thinking about in neuroscience, we talk about top-down processes and bottom-up processes, where top-down is kind of like cognition and thinking and how deeply cognition and thinking can impact the body,
Mm.
and the psyche, and even, through psychoneuroimmunology, it, impacts the immune system and so on. And we have bottom-up processes,
Mhm.
which are the sensory experiences and the felt sense and all that stuff. And I'm thinking about the daimon as being neither nor and both and,
Mhm.
kind of like a place where top down and bottom up meet at a
Mhm.
threshold. And so I'm thinking about, okay, I mean, because I'm really inspired by these authors too, like Marion Woodman. Hell yeah. You know,
Yeah.
Addiction to Perfection was just an incredible book. I
Yeah.
still, it's on my bookshelf back there. I just think it's such a wonderful, important book. I
Yes.
love how it starts. It's like this book is about cutting the head off of an evil witch.
Whoa. Get your attention.
That gets your attention. And the evil witch is perfectionism,
Mm.
essentially. I suppose what the patriarchy does to the feminine in such a way that it kind of mutates and becomes an evil witch,
Mm.
that is kind of like a companion to the patriarchy or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like introject an internalized persecutor of some
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah. 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 And so these philosophical ideas, these cognitive ideas, these wonderful writers, Woodman and Clarissa Pinkola Estes, it sounds like there was some ideas in the brew, and
Yes.
that's kind of how I'm hearing you. And then there's these bottom up processes and experiences and the stuff that you were up to in your life and so on.
Mm.
And somehow it combined, and sometimes I totally agree. It's like, gosh, do I really have a choice about what I'm passionate about or where I get a job sometimes? Like, yeah, I have a choice, but the calling aspect, it just kind
Yes.
of pulls you along, right? You
Yes.
just, like I worked with men for many years. I've led men's groups for,
Cool.
many, many years because I had some really formative experiences early on working with guys.
Mm.
And I don't know how it happened. I just found myself in a group of men. And
Mm.
like those guys, they somehow communicated to me via their bodies and their presence that
Mm.
I could become emotional. Like, what an idea
Oh.
for a man, right? Like, oh, you can be emotional. Like, I'm from Minnesota, right? So it's like my emotions were on deep freeze.
Mhm.
And so like somehow they just communicate, but I don't know, like even how I felt drawn to it in the first place. Like, I
Mm.
can't remember, like the content isn't there. I just remember finding
Yeah.
myself there.
Yeah, it's sort of it's mysterious how we end up getting drawn forward on our path. And there's an element of calling and there's an element of trusting the coherence of your own life. That if you were to look back at a journal from 10 or 20 years ago, you'd find clues to who you are now and what you would end up doing in those decades. But yeah, I think you said it very concisely. I had some formative experiences reading the work of those authors, and it just felt like this is what I really want to be deeply engaged with, this kind of work. And then when I was going through my big obliterating grief period in my early and mid 30s, when I thought I would be becoming a mother, instead I'm going through my life exploding. And that dark night of the soul. When I was going through that, I was meeting with a Jungian analyst for a little while, and she said, "You need other women right now, Annalise. You can't be alone. We need each other. You need to find a women's group." So I did, and the ways that I was helped by that group, both spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and materially went way beyond my expectations. And there's a magic that happens in those containers that I don't even know how to explain it, but it's as though we create our own magical world that it is how the world could be all the time. You know, we create this radical, almost heavenly reality where women are celebrating each other's beauty and radiance and sexiness and genius and accomplishments. And I feel like we're trained to feel envious and to feel threatened and to feel scarcity, to distrust each other, to tear each other down. But we have this innate capacity to hype each other up, actually, and add to each other's magic and radiance in a way that ends up being greater than the sum of its parts in these containers. And sometimes I think if a man could be a fly on the wall at one of these meetings, they would just, I don't know what they might be turned on. If they're into women, they might have their concept of what this whole woman thing means totally flipped on its head. I don't know. But having said that, as I was alluding to earlier, what I'm leaning into more and more in my work now is that I've always been drawn to what is this feminine embodied path of descent, Inanna's underworld journey. That's what I'm really passionate about. And I'm passionate about doing that with women. But I've noticed as I've continued along, expanding into other communities and radical healing spaces, that I love spaces where men and people of all genders are welcomed in. And then it feels like a radical community of love where everyone's hunger for the feminine is being nourished. And I feel like that's what the feminine is about, really, is just this abundance, this abundant love and compassion for all.
Yeah. I love this image. It's a paradoxical image. And when we're talking archetypes, we're talking paradox because archetypes are two-sided. At least that's the way that Jung talked about it to begin with, that they have a function, that they kind of have dual functions.
Yeah.
And the phrase that I love about the feminine container is that it's a womb and a tomb.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I like it because you got that rhyme in there and you got that element of the Inanna and this kind of darker element of things dissolve, but you also have this kind of golden embryo element where people can really be in this place of radiance together.
Yeah.
Which I think we deeply long for, to be in a space of radiance and to nurture radiance in each other.
Yeah.
I think there's a longing for belonging.
Yes.
And then, it can be so unsatisfying to be in what Ken Wilber called the flatland society, or what Robert Bly called sibling society. Where everybody's just throwing around their opinions and there's no cosmic parents really. And if there is a cosmic parent, then it ends up being quite patriarchal and monotheistic, right? But where things can really, really open up beyond just being, or maybe repackaging it in a way that it's like, okay, if we're siblings, fine, but let's see if we can be radiant together. So, like in my early days with the men's work, there's a curious paradox there too, because it's like, okay, here I am, and I've been, kind of placed in the be a man box by society, like thou shalt not cry, thou shalt not be vulnerable, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not express thy body like this or like that, or, be a man box, okay? Just get in there, Tierney. When I was in a group of guys that were elders to me, because I was just in my early 20s, right? And they were like reading poetry and stuff. it was kind of a jaw dropper to me because at least where I grew up in Minnesota, guys didn't throw around poetry and start crying. This really strong container for finding the feminine for me, right? And such a paradox, right? Like I was placed in touch with my feminine. I was introduced to my feminine through men. Through men who, elder men who had done the work in themselves and, gone through various phases of wombing and tombing and wombing and all of that. And then I remember, I told you about this before we clicked record, that I was, several weeks after my first initiation weekend with guys, I was driving through the California hills somewhere far north on the 101. And it was one of those misty kind of like, magical evenings. And I was listening to Theater of the Imagination by Dr. Estes. And it's just such a powerful moment for me because I realized that my imagination had been in a stranglehold. That my imagination was essentially dead and that it was starting to be resuscitated, in collaboration with these guys. So it was like the beginning of the resuscitation of my imagination. And Clarissa was in there. And then so kind of weird that, then I was really inspired to, okay, I'm going to read Women Who Run with the Wolves. Now, this is a dude in his 20s. A dude in his 20s from Minnesota reading Women Who Run with the Wolves.
That's impressive. Wow.
Yeah, so I really took it on board. I'm like, feminine, I got to have it.
Yeah. Well, it's so delicious. Who doesn't want it? Yeah, and it is a part of our humanity. It belongs to everyone. And people who identify as women, we have a journey with our masculine too. And I love what you're saying. And I want to talk about this more in my work and in my public communications and to people about what I'm about, is that men are wounded by the patriarchy too and traumatized, very much so, deeply.
First tingle response.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of conversation about the patriarchy. It's almost become kind of a social media meme, one of those overused words over the last nearly decade because of some of the people we've had in power. I think it's really risen to the forefront of collective awareness, this idea. And I don't think it should be synonymous with just women and feminism and women's issues. It's everyone. This is a toxic system that hurts everyone.
Yeah. In my dissertation, I brought in this wonderful writer, Melissa Myers, who wrote a book called Thicker Than Water. And it's about essentially her thesis is that the origin of the patriarchy has to do with the origin of sacrificial practices on planet Earth. That the symbolic construction of blood in ancient cultures essentially created this binary split or this bifurcation where men became the drawers of the holy and pure sacrificial blood that was drawn during sacrificial rites and offered up to the deity. And that blood was holy and pure and created the infinite lineages of culture and civilization, whereas men weren't allowed into the sacrificial container, or women weren't allowed into the sacrificial container because their menstrual blood was symbolically held as a contagion. And symbolically crafted by the culture as essentially symbolically associated with finitude, with death. Well, not necessarily death, but certainly contagion. and finitude. So you have, it's kind of like this contagious dynamic of the feminine that is connected to finitude and kind of dirtiness, and the masculine, which is connected with the infinite and the holy and the pure.
Mhm.
And she makes a pretty strong claim. I think it's really interesting that, gosh, the origins of the patriarchy could be very, very old indeed.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I've been introduced to the concept, and I don't know how historically accurate it is, that the purifying blood or the sacrificial blood, before it became an actual sacrifice to draw blood, was the menstrual blood
Could be.
of, could be. I mean, this is one of those things where sometimes when I read about the idea of ancient priestess cultures where the menstrual blood of the priestesses was cleansing the sins of the community in the way that sacrificial blood would, I wonder if it's a kind of intuitive scholarship or how accurate it is, or if this is kind of just coming straight out of the collective unconscious or the collective imagination.
It's hard to say, the archaeological stuff is, there's not a lot of, kind of evidence for because we're talking about those practices, and
Yeah.
blood doesn't hang around. Tissue and blood doesn't hang around for long, but, little goddess statues that are made out of rock stay around for a long time. So something was happening there in terms of an ancient relationship with a feminine deity for sure. But
Yeah.
like what actually happened? And I mean, if we think even like, for example, 75,000 years ago, where there's a big cluster, a big nexus in, the Altai Mountains of Siberia, what were they doing 75,000 years ago there? I mean, it'd be cool to, hey, Annalise, maybe we can jump into a cauldron and time travel there now.
I would love to. I'd love to go see what those people were doing. I want to get in there and see what they were doing. Maybe that's the longing that we've been talking about this whole conversation, really, is that longing for something that's so lost, but we know it in our bones and we know it in our blood, and kind of divining that back through a new kind of feminine psychology.
Yeah, it's a lunar psychology, right? This was the contagion aspect, or what the patriarch, just for lack of a better word at this point, does is it, especially the fiercer edges of the feminine, it catapults it and scapegoats it and burns it at the stake and judges it as lunacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And where there is something decidedly lunar about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a great Allen Ginsberg quote. It pops up on one of my apps from time to time that says something like, "Follow your madness, don't hide the moonlight," or something like that. You could flip it around, follow the moonlight, don't hide your madness. But yeah, there's this lunar consciousness, which I think is really, you could say it's the unconscious. It's the daimon. It's the body. It's the soul.
Yeah. I ran into my research recently that the rhythms that a lot of people know about, which are the circadian rhythms, these are kind of like sun-based rhythms where deep in the hypothalamus, we have these light registers that spin out genetic mechanisms and stuff like that, and master gene folders and stuff like that. But they've found a rhythm that is a subset of master genetic folders called the circadial rhythm.
Oh.
Circadial. And this is a 12-hour tidal rhythm that is very, very ancient, that traces way back into the primitive oceans, where genetic clocks were actually responding directly to lunar forces.
Wow. Okay. I've
Wild,
never
huh?
heard of that. That is wild.
Yeah, it's so deep, right? That the moon and its tides and its rhythms impact our DNA, and the DNA readout process is just, we are very deeply lunar.
Mm-hmm.
We're lunatics. We're just lunatics, basically.
We are. Maybe we're werewolves too. I have to say, I didn't know this. It feels like there've been so many full moon Halloweens in my lifetime, but it's a new moon this year for Halloween. It feels more quiet, I don't feel like I necessarily need to go out. Just have an introspective Halloween ancestor.
I mean, what does she teach us, right? That there's rhythms, that there's a time for falling off the tree and rotting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's kind of connects with this Inanna image, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there's a time for fallowness and to kind of rot either on the tree or in the ground and then be returned to life.
Right. And something about that death nourishes whatever is going to be born anew.
Yeah. And then it'll be full again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It just keeps going around. I live in Hudson Valley, New York now, and I love how seasonal it is here. You can't ignore the seasons. It's in your face.
Have you ever seen The Magicians? It's a TV show. It's modeled off of Lev Grossman's book, The Magicians.
Oh, no.
Oh, it's so funny. They have one little sub-narrative within the 6 seasons or whatever, where they end up getting initiated into this kind of like this lunar worshiping. They're like basically moon worshipers.
Oh.
And their initiation into the tradition or whatever is they had to stay up for 5 days straight.
Wow.
They had to stay up for 5 days straight in order to be able to communicate with the moon. And then so once you were initiated into the tradition, you were called a lunatic.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
So they're just kind of playing with that word, right? Playing with the word lunatic. And I think the reason why I'm bringing this kind of crazy vibe from television is that the crazier portion of the feminine, I guess I should say the wilder, this is why I liked Women Who Run with the Wolves so much. When I'm working with men, we got to get back to rewild. I mean, then rewilding becomes a meme too, right? Which ends up being quite domestic. I don't know how we've managed to do domesticated rewilding, but we've managed to do it. I don't.
Yeah, it's a household name. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
It's like we get the wildness, right? Just that's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chaos. I guess you could say wild, undomesticated expression of whatever wants to be expressed in the moment.
I have to confess, Annalise, that I have peeked into the secrets of a women's group.
Really? Say more about that.
My wife runs a women's group, or she's part of running a women's group. And periodically they do a circle in our backyard. And I try to be respectful as much as I can. Mm-hmm. Like sacred space over there, but periodically my 4.5-year-old daughter will get so interested in it that she'll try to kind of like bolt into the space.
Oh, yeah.
So I've had these periodic kind of like, oh, there's the wildness. Mm-hmm. There's that golden, that radiance, right? That comes with the wildness. And also there's a similar thing with the men's work where it's like, gosh, if y'all could just see us here now, like how loving and how connected and how fiercely supportive of life we are, in this space. If you could just come into this space, it would just be a fly on the wall. We can do so much.
Yeah, I've had a vision of combining men's and women's groups so that we can see each other doing our work, and how healing it would be to see each other in our light and in our vulnerability, that the likes of which can only be maybe cultivated in a space that is for men or for women. But yeah, I love that image of your daughter running into the middle of the women's group. That so often happens. There's so often babies and little ones coming into the space, and fur babies, familiars, dogs and cats. They're drawn to it. As soon as mom starts making weird wild woman noises, all of the kids want to know what's going on. The dogs want to come in and start barking. It gets really wild.
Yeah.
It's really raucous really quickly, but it's just play.
So this wildness and the witchy feminine, and you have this psychedelic element, and you've been into so much stuff and done so much inquiry philosophically and had so many experiences. How do you, because not everybody's into that, right? And not everybody that comes to clinic, I'm imagining not everybody that comes into your psychotherapy clinic is like, can readily or easily go there. How do you make the bridge between this kind of like wild, wondrous world of the imagination, the theater of the imagination, into people that it might not be easy for them to go there? How do you build that bridge? Can you talk a little bit about your practice?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it depends how people came into my practice. Sometimes people are drawn into my practice because they want that witchy women's group kind of energy, or they want to feel like they're in a coven, or they want to feel like they're in some kind of deep somatic or imaginal ceremony in every single session. And I can certainly go there with those people. But I also have insurance clients who came to me because they needed someone who took their insurance. And I love working with those people too. The only insurance plan I am in network with anymore is Alameda Alliance. So it's Medi-Cal for Alameda County. And I have done a lot of evaluation of my business and where my money is coming from and where I'm investing it, blah, blah, blah. And I realized I could keep pushing really hard to have a completely full fee practice. But I love having some full fee people and some Medi-Cal people who are just in a different situation, a very different situation in life from people who can pay my full fee. And then I work with out of network benefits too. So that makes it a lot easier for some people. But, you have a visual, imaginal channel, you have a somatic channel, you have an emotional channel, you have a cognitive channel, and people have different strengths. And you're probably familiar with this in your work. I try to get a sense of where someone is really strong and lean into the channels that are strong for them, while also bolstering the ones that aren't quite so strong. So someone might have a big emotional channel. So we'll work with that a lot, but then try to develop the imaginal channel a little more. Or I might invite someone into an imaginal visualization kind of exercise, and they might just say, I don't see anything. This isn't doing anything for me. I'll go, okay, so the visual channel isn't the strongest channel. That's okay. Let's see what's happening in the other channels. And one of the things I'm learning, which I think is really interesting, is that I think we're all kind of trained to dissociate from our somatic and our bodily sensations to some degree. We've all kind of become disembodied from that. But I'm learning it's really important to talk to my clients at the start of our work together and let them know that I'm very thematically oriented. And if I ever ask you what's happening in your body, this is why. Because I think people are almost kind of don't know what to do with that question. If I'm trying to go a layer deeper by saying, okay, what's happening in your body when you tell me that? Often people just say, they say something that's not a body sensation.
Yeah.
everyone's different, and I try to follow my client's lead. And I believe there's some reason why they were drawn to me and my work. And if I'm not a good fit for them, they'll self-select out, and that's okay. And I'll help them connect to whoever they're meant to work with. I feel like you had a question about my background in philosophy in there somewhere.
Yep.
To speak to that, I've realized over time that actually gave me a really excellent foundation, because as someone who's really interested in transcendental and transpersonal psychology and all this kind of out there stuff and archetypes, and talking to people about extraordinary experiences that they've had under psychedelics or otherwise, to have that rigorous training and background in skepticism, if you will, is really important. And I hope it makes me more trustworthy, that I don't go into the work with some spiritual or philosophical system that I completely believe in wholeheartedly and that I'm going to impose on my clients. Do you know what I mean? But I think of myself as more of an epistemological anarchist, which is a wonderful phrase that I pilfered it from oh my God, who's the guy who wrote High Weirdness? I can't think of his name right now, but I want to give him credit for that. It's just the idea that I'm ready to entertain or destroy any theory. And I think that's an important attitude. That's a great attitude to have if you're working in these realms where you get to hear about all kinds of experiences that people have had, and you're respecting their experience and their perspective, but you're also never imposing, and you're open to what they're saying they believe or they've experienced, but you're never imposing, this is how it is. I'm an authority on reality. I'm not. I don't think anyone knows what the hell's going on here. So it's important to remember that too. It's just, we're working with mystery, with great mystery.
Well, the turtle family that lives outside of my office, I think they're doing pretty good with it, with reality. That maybe
they're good with reality.
they're good with it. Epistemological anarchism. I love it. It's totally like Deleuze. Like my beloved is Deleuze. I mean, Deleuze. Yeah. Which is brew Deleuze.
I must confess, I need to get more into Deleuze. Yeah, I never got fully. There's a podcast I follow that I love that talks about Deleuze a lot. It's Weird Studies. It's a great podcast you may have heard of. But yeah, tell me more. I to my shame, I need to read more Deleuze.
He's just deliciously complex and really maps on wonderfully to those two words, epistemological anarchism. He just, whatever's nearest, either uplift it and glorify it in wonderful ways, or deconstruct the hell out of it, or both, or move back and forth. And it's just so mobile. His work is so mobile. He says, and he just makes up words. That's one of the things that I love about him. What he says about gender and sexuality, for example, and this is Deleuze and Guattari. He says that we have 1,000 tiny sexes within. So like, it's not 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, but we have thousands of sexualities, and in fact, we're basically saying that each, is there 8 billion people on planet Earth? Then there's 8 billion different genders.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah.
Because it's precise to who we are. It maps to individuation in an interesting way. It's like we'll never be repeated. We're an assemblage of intensities, an assemblage of the genome and stuff like that is never going to be repeated. And therefore we carry our own unique sexuality that's never going to be, and gender that's never going to be repeated.
Oh, I love that. I've always intuited that the realms of gender and sexuality are really a realm of such complexity and mystery and chaos that it's difficult. We keep creating more and more and more and more boxes for all these different categories you might fall into. I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying that, but because I affirm everyone's experience of their gender and sexuality. And some people are like, I don't know where I fall in any of this. None of it applies to me.
Yeah.
You know? I kind of feel like that a lot of the time.
Well, yeah, and one of the beauties and the difficult pieces about Deleuze is it's like, show me an identity and I'll deconstruct it and praise it at the same time. You know, it's this complexity about the difficulties that come with identity, what the Jungians call the identity complex. You know, and we often dance with the identity complex, of course, in therapy, because that is the ego.
Yes.
You know, and the ego serves and the ego can limit. It can serve, it can limit in horrible ways and lead to atrocities and the thwarting of a life force. But it can also be a container for somebody to be safe in the world and to belong. He holds the paradox in a really lovely way. But in the end, most identities are microfascisms.
Yeah.
Or macro.
Yeah. I mean, I like Terrence McKenna's saying that your ego helps you sign checks and it helps you know whose mouth to put food into.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's your avatar. It's helpful to know which avatar you're in, you know, for this current experience.
Yeah, well, and insofar as therapy goes, I love what you were saying before, because there's so many therapeutic identities that are packaged and sold and stuff. And there can be this hidden claim or explicit claim to truth. Epistemological claim to truth, like this is how therapy should be done in a cognitive behavioral manner or a Jungian manner or in a somatic manner. And it's like, I like to pick on the somatics community for being anti-intellectual. Because it's like, okay, if the royal road to meaning is the sensory experience in the body, and you're saying that the intellect is pretty much always bad and gets us in trouble. Then it's like, well, I don't know. It's like, you know, hey, let's back up a little bit here.
Totally. Yeah, I get that vibe too. I feel like somatics have become such a part of the zeitgeist. It's almost, you know, there's so many somatic coaches and people who are saying, let's just go into the body now. And it's not just always work that way. But just like with any great thing, you can take it and kind of construe it in a way that is suddenly not so great anymore. And I get what you're saying, where people are maybe in these somatic spaces sometimes saying, oh, I was going up into my head and I was having thoughts. And so I know whatever that was, it was stupid and meaningless. It's like, no, your mind is beautiful. We need more people standing up for the life of the mind, the intellectual life.
Yeah. Yeah. The mind creates, it composes. One of the terms that I love in Deleuze is he calls a therapeutic space a space of composition. Calls it the plane of composition, and it's great for expressive artistry that we compose, that we create in a field with our clients.
Oh, yeah.
That there's a co-creation. And the Jungians, what do they call it? They call it a relational field.
Yes.
You know, we're out of this bi-directional thing where we have, okay, the transference comes from the unconscious client and goes to the conscious therapist, who then, if they're not that good or something like that, sends back counter transference. No, we're all in the cauldron and we do our best to create within the constraints that we have.
Yes, we're in this crucible together. Who calls it? You called it say that again, a field, not the relational field, but
the plane of composition.
Who came up with that again?
Deleuze.
Deleuze came up with that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I have to read Deleuze. The plane of composition. Yeah, I frequently struggle to find a way to convey how I actually experienced the relational field and the therapeutic container. It is an art form. And I think it's a field that's still getting comfortable with the fact that it's an art form. And it's a place where you have to be in flow. And there's a kind of inter-somatic field of awareness that we're creating from in therapy. I love it. I almost don't even know. There's so much more I could say about it, but I don't even know what else to say about it. It's kind of leaning into the darkness or into the unknown of that.
It's
space.
it's like the curiosity, the kind of brailing into the space together, feeling into like, okay, who are we now? You know, and obviously people that are more concretely inclined or are like in that more of that cognitive canal. What did you call it? Cognitive channel?
Middle. Yeah.
Cognitive channel. I mean, therapy is our bread and butter. So it's a composition. Every time we open our mouths to say something, we compose, we create.
Yes.
You know? And I think when it's just more of the same, and I think this is where the problem of identity comes in and the problem of grandiosity that the Jungians are so wonderful at challenging. The question of grandiosity, because there's this tendency to identify with a meaning-making style or cognitive approach or whatever it is, and then start to inflate and get grandiose, right? With the method or, with oneself. I mean, I think there's a lot of therapists out there that, haven't had any supervision, like peer supervision or like colleague, whatever, haven't had supervision in over 10 years. I bet you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's a kind of slippery slope into grandiosity there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an idea in Hakomi somatic therapy that it's good to notice when you are deriving ego nutrition from the work. When your ego is kind of going, I totally nailed that. I'm so good at this.
They cried. They cried today.
Right. To notice when that's happening, because I think it does happen to the best of us, those little moments of getting a little inflated, like, I fucking kicked ass today, or, like,
yeah.
So good. I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, no, we need peer supervision, peer consultation. That's really important. And I'm at a point where I hope I never lose this edge of vulnerability and even awkward nervousness about being with people. I don't want to become this perfect fortress of confidence that is.
Yeah, it's such a dynamic dance, right? Because there's a lot of people, in Silicon Valley here, they need to know that I know stuff.
Yeah.
What needs to be there to kind of get in the door and get the therapy going. But my soul is rooted in, this is a mystery. Like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
Like, how did something come out of nothing? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Like,
this is like,
don't any of this shit in.
this is shit.
Really, what's going on? Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting line that we have to walk, because I think maybe some clients need to see the expertise. They need to see the confidence in the expertise in order to feel safe. And in one of my trainings at the Integrative Psychiatry Institute, how did they frame it? They framed it as therapist competence versus, there's some kind of paradox with therapist competence, where if there's not enough competence that the client can discern, they don't feel safe. And that can bring up fear. If there's too much competence, and the therapist is constantly, displaying how very knowledgeable and insightful they are, that can bring up shame. So it's this like fear, shame. So, and you kind of have to feel into, what does this client need? Some people need, you can sense that there's some fear. There's, it's taking a little longer for them to feel safe. Maybe especially people who are coming in to do trauma recovery work, or they're already experiencing a lot of fear and anxiety. Sometimes those people need to hear the confident expression of expertise in order to feel safe enough to get in and do the work. And some people need to see the vulnerability too, but it's aligned with everyone.
Yeah.
And and over time it changes depending on what's happening in that relationship with that person.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the word reflexivity. I really like this word reflexivity. Have you heard this term, reflexivity?
I don't know in the context you're meaning.
In the meaning of, because you're talking before about skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
And that the philosophical traditions can nurture a type of distance towards one's own thought processes. To be able to kind of like have one's thought processes almost like an object that you can put on the table. And kind of, you know what I mean? Kind of like, all right, well, I'm thinking in this style of thought right now, like, for example, Jungian, okay, I'm like doing an archetypal analysis right now, but like that's not the whole picture. So I'll put that on the table.
All right.
And let's think about competency here. And oh gosh, yeah, that statement was pretty good. And, just like this dynamic process, and reflexivity is kind of like a term that indicates a critical attitude towards subjectivity itself. Like that capacity to put things on the table and just be like, okay, oh, I'm kind of grasping onto my knowing here. Okay, let's see if we can put that on the table.
Yeah, we have to always hold our current hypothesis about what's going on lightly.
Barbara Babcock, she's an international authority on the trickster archetype. So it's interesting, you have this expert on the trickster talking about this function of reflexivity, that it might have something to do with the trickster function. Because we get too serious a lot when we get grandiose and we're like holding on to our thoughts and our opinions and we're all judgy and, it's like, oh, I'm so smart and oh, my opinion.
But who knows what's going on here? Yeah.
Let me quote this person and that person, and we know, or like, it's just like, we could pick on anybody. We could pick on Hakomi. We could pick on, ourselves. We could doesn't matter. In the realm of the trickster, everything is there to be tricked.
Yeah.
Everything is there on the table to be played with. It's like whatever concept is nearest, whatever identity is nearest. And this is why I love Deleuze so much. He's like, let's play.
It's a trick or a treat. That brings us.
Bring it back to Halloween. Oh, yeah, Annalise. Bring it on. Oh, yeah. I was hoping I'd bring this out.
Oh, ready.
Develop reflexivity. Oh,
I love that. Oh, you can always bring it on. Bring. Oh, we sound like a couple of lunatics.
Well, yeah, totally. I hope, gosh, oh, what do they think about us, Annalise?
None of my business, I guess.
Totally. Well, so there's the consistent with where we've just come from in terms of putting elements on the table to be played with and looking at both sides of the equation and developing reflexivity. What can you tell us about the light and the shadow of the psychedelic community writ large?
Oh, How much time do we have?
20 minutes.
The light and the shadow of psychedelic community at large, or writ large.
Writ large, yeah.
Writ
I
large.
mean, there's generalizations. I'm asking you to generalize, which can be a danger, but we only got, 15 minutes.
In terms of the current so-called
The current trends in the so-called psychedelic renaissance, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Trying to think of the best way to say this. Folks in the West hopping onto the trend in a way that is purely mercenary. So seeing a money-making opportunity and hopping on it. I think there's a danger in that for several reasons. I think we need to look at the ancient medicine systems that we are actually rooted in modern Western psychedelic therapy, and pay homage to those systems in whatever way we can, in a reciprocal, respectful, fair way. It doesn't mean you need to fly to Peru and drink ayahuasca however many times, but see if there's a way that you can make the community leaders and medicine people and scholars of the indigenous communities that still practice psychedelic medicine, if you can make them your colleagues, make them your teachers, learn from them, again, obviously in a respectful, reciprocal way, because most of the time, those ancient psychedelic medicine systems are rooted in a complex ecosystem, an actual ecosystem, an epistemological ecosystem that is just very different from what we will be creating if we're just extracting the molecules and like dropping it into our clinics and our living rooms. So that's number one, and acknowledging, who we're learning from. And I think we need to learn from those communities and those traditions in order to create Western psychedelic medicine protocols that are effective and respectful. So that's one thing. And there's a lot more that I could say about all of that in terms of the episteme that, ayahuasca, for example, is rooted in. The best way that I can explain it is we are communing with the brew and the plant as a spirit, as a master teacher, not to be meddled with, to be respected. In the West, that worldview is so different from the episteme that we're coming from in the West that just wants to look at the molecules and figure out, okay, so you've got in ayahuasca, you've got the DMT, and then you've got the enzyme inhibitor that makes the DMT last longer. Yeah. So let's figure out how we can just take that molecule and we can make it, maybe put it in a pill and maybe sell it. Maybe people can do it in their living room. It's like, oh, please don't do that. There's a whole lifestyle preparation context that goes into drinking ayahuasca even one time that has been created, because these people have been doing this for thousands of years, and they know it's going to work better if you're not engaging in alcohol for a couple months or whatever it is before you start. If you start to cut out meat or red meats, and then when you get a little closer, salts and certain spices, this will help the plant communicate with your system better. You're creating a cleaner system for the plant to communicate with. That is just so different from getting drunk at a party and accessing the compound and taking it. Do you know what I hope I'm making sense.
For sure, yeah. It's coming through clear.
Good. I think there's a shadow of de-souling, if that word makes sense, kind of stripping the soul out of the psychedelic space by people hopping in with purely money-making concerns.
Yeah. Well, I get what you mean about ketamine, because there's so much interesting research about what it does in the brain in terms of the memory system
Mhm.
and brain derived neurotropic factor and stuff like that. It's got so much interesting science behind it. And it's very much this business model thing that's starting to propagate, right?
Model. Yes. I think one thing that I don't particularly love is the model of therapy assisted psychedelics as opposed to psychedelic assisted therapy. So you're making it all about the molecule, all about the thing that you're putting in your
Mm.
body, the compound. What I've seen with that model is, one rapid preparation session with a therapist, then you go in and you receive a ketamine infusion, and then you have a rapid exit interview kind of with a therapist. I don't see that as being a particularly useful model in terms of therapeutic value, but I see a lot of models and clinics like that cropping up. I'm a huge proponent of the idea that the relationship is the most important healing factor in therapy. It doesn't even matter what kind of therapy you're doing. If there's no relationship, you're not going anywhere. And psychedelics beautifully amplify that relational component. And that's part of what makes psychedelic therapy so powerful. So I hope that doesn't get lost in I don't know if I want to call it a gold rush, but in the kind of rush to get in on the.
Yeah. Yeah. To capitalize on the human yearning to grow, to transcend, and to connect a little bit more with what we were talking about earlier about innocence and toxic innocence. I think there is baked into the fabric of this stuff some sort of toxic innocence in the West that's just
Mm.
running this addiction to perfection and addiction to efficiency. So if it's like, okay, give me
Yeah.
the Holy Grail, give me the
Mhm.
Holy Grail. Give me it's the psychedelics now. Before, earlier, there's these various waves of, oh, we have the answer now. So then we
Right.
can arrive at this place where, and it's actually ridiculous. It's therapy if we're talking about the complete deconstruction and reconstruction of a self, the tomb and the womb thing.
Mhm.
That's going to take many years, and this is in the
Right.
ancient traditions. This
Yeah.
is where and so many of them have the initiatory illness dimension, where you
Mhm.
have a complete dissolving of the self and building of a self, and this can take 2 decades,
Yeah. I
more.
like hearing that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and the Jungians know this. They're like, therapy starts at about 2 years.
Right.
And like this fantasy that it's just going to accelerate my growth. And sure, it can well do. And it has done for me in the past as well. But I've also been doing long, hard work for 25 years on myself. And I'm still on the path. It's a gnarly path.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It's gnarly. Yeah, maybe just quickly, I realize we're close to the end of our time. In terms of the shadow, I'm having other things come up. I'm like, gosh, there's several shadows. And you sort of alluded to this in what you just said. I see sometimes this idea that psychedelics are a cure-all or they're for everyone. Now just get high, that'll help you. But I
Mm.
think that's also a misunderstanding and a potentially dangerous one. It's not. I don't think it is for everyone, and I don't think it's for everything. It's great for some people at some times in their life. Also, the microdosing thing, I've heard some people say that they have had great results with microdosing, and I believe them, and I'm really happy for them. I feel that if you're coming from a holistic homeopathic approach to the system of the human being, you want to work with the system and get to the root of what's causing the imbalance and see if you can shift it at the root rather than trying to add this constant daily input for God knows how long to create the balance. And it's almost, if you're microdosing ketamine every day, it's almost the same thing as, just a prescription pharmaceutical drug. You're taking this other thing. And I'm not knocking prescription pharmaceutical drugs. I think they have an important place and they're an important part of the work at certain phases for a lot of people. I think it's a convenient idea, again, for startups because you have an ongoing customer.
Yeah. I love what you're saying here. I feel like it's a dynamic balance. I really appreciate that philosophical, the Jungian philosophical tradition has a way of challenging grandiosity, kind of holding up the light and the dark and holding it in a dynamic balance. And I can feel that in you. I really appreciate that about our discussion, your mobility and your capacity to see both sides and be in this compositional space with me.
I love that. Yes, I appreciate it.
Yeah, we could have talked about so much more like trauma resolution, EMDR, and all that stuff, but it'd be nice to do it another time.
Sure. Yeah, it's been really fun. Sincerely.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you like to pitch anything for the audience? Like you got this wonderful book that I want to make space for you to talk about for a moment if you want to throw that into the soup here.
Sure. Yeah. My book, Heal Your Witch Wound. I still stand by everything in that book. It came out in 2021, and I went through a weird kind of shame collapse after it came out, which in a way just proves the point of the book. The main premise of the book, which is that women can have these unique challenges with sharing their voice and coming into their power and creating in the world. I've circled back around to it, and I do stand by everything in that book, and it came from the deepest place in my being at the time. And I think everything in there is valuable for anyone who is going through a dark night of the soul, going through a phase of being lost in their life on an underworld journey. And that's kind of all of us right now. I think we're going through a collective underworld birth passage. Yeah, if you feel called to that and you like journaling and doing rituals, check it out. And I have another book. It's a poetry chapbook called Holy Blue. I'm working on other things right now. I feel like the same book wants to keep rewriting itself in a new, more sophisticated form. So look out for that. And I have my own podcast that's kind of under reconstruction. It's been called A Life of Expression, but it's going to be called The Luminous Dark. So yeah, check that out. I'm on Instagram at Annalise_Oatman. And my therapy website is deeperwelltherapy.com. I have another website, annaliseoatman.com. That's kind of my writer website, but I need to add more art to it.
Awesome. I really appreciate your allotness, your interdisciplinary element. And this is how this is the vibe I like, the interdisciplinary thing. So I was just thinking at this last moment here that bodies and life appears to be on some fundamental level hologrammatic. And I was thinking to myself about Halloween. And I was thinking to myself that this is going to be an evergreen podcast, and like we're here on Halloween. You can see where I'm going with this. So like, here we are on Halloween and this is going to be evergreen. So people will be listening to it, on August and December and whatever. But is there anything that you would like to kind of throw into the soup of whenever that person is listening in the future, which is a non-Halloween day? What from Halloween, being that you have this witchy dimension, would you like to cast into the future to bring a little bit of Halloween into August or December or wherever a person might be non-Halloweening?
I would say, and this is one of those things where it's like, I don't understand the nature of reality and I'm an epistemological anarchist, but I've had noetic experiences in some mysterious way, the ancestors being very near and the ancestors being a chain of love standing behind you.
Mm.
And so whatever time of year it is that you're listening to this, I hope you feel that you have a lot of support around you. There is a chain of love stretching a long way behind you. And I think it's important to focus on not just all the intergenerational trauma that we're working with, but the incredible love that brought you to life, the incredible resilience. And all of that is with you and accessible to you now.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, Annalise, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, for me too. Thank you so much.
Blessings on your good work in the world, and hope to see you again.
Blessings. Thank you so much, Dr.
Yeah.
B.
Thank you for listening to The Boundless Body with the Somatic Doctor. Please leave a comment, subscribe, and like us on social media.
We're a swarm. We're a colony. We're a multiplicity.
Until next time, be well.